This edition of Mac Voices is supported by the Mac Voices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter for Mac Voices viewers and listeners. Get the inside scoop on all the Mac Voices news by visiting macvoices.com/newsletter to subscribe. Welcome to the Mac Jury on Mac Voices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we have an esteemed panel tonight to talk about a very important topic. All our topics are always important, but this one seems particularly so. We're going to discuss the FBI's requests for Apple to do some data mining, jailbreaking, data scraping. It depends on what you've read and how you define which. But at the end of the day, we're talking about your security, my security, and everyone's security. There are new rules for this show. We have three terrific panelists. The one thing we will tell you is we're recording this at about 7:15 East Coast time on Tuesday. And I bring that up only because this story seems to change every few hours or something else seems to come. So we're making our comments based on what has happened up to this point. And by the time you hear this, something else may have happened. With that, let's find out who's here. Going from left to right on my screen, as I have come to do so I don't miss anyone, Mr. Brett Terpstra. Brett, great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's always good. So give us a quick rundown on where you are and what you do and where we can find you.
I am in my basement. I am an independent coder, and I write an app called Mark II and many other smaller projects. And I blog at brettterpstra.com, been writing at macstories.net, and yeah, that's me.
That's great. It's good to have you as always.
Thanks.
Next up, Mr. Jeff Gamet, the man with what looks like a fire going on over his one shoulder. Jeff, it's great to have you.
It's always great to be here, and luckily it's only a digital fire, so no need to run around in a panic.
Good. Well, I'm glad we didn't have to call the police department, or excuse me, the fire department in your city.
Yeah, that would just awkward.
Yeah.
Awkward.
So remind folks where they can find you when you're not here serving on the Mac Jury.
You can find me over at macobserver.com along with several other amazingly talented writers. And you can find me on a ton of podcasts like Mac Observer Daily Observations, the iOS Show, The Big Show. Anyhow, you can Google me and find me in many, many places.
Good. That's an interesting way to approach it. Last but not least, we haven't seen him for a while, but I'm very happy that he's joined us tonight, Mr. Weldon Dodd. Weldon, it's great to have you.
Thanks for having me back, Chuck. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's been too long. Where can folks find you when you're not here?
Well, I run Rewind Technology, a managed service provider in Colorado, and an Apple authorized training center. And so the best place to see me this year will probably be at some of the Mac IT conferences, ACES in Austin. We'll see what else comes up.
Great. Well, people then can see you live and in person.
That's right.
I like it. Guys, I was anxious to get a group together to discuss this. I tried last week and the scheduling just didn't work out. And as it turns out, it's probably a good thing because we had more developments over the weekend. I don't know about you all. I got to talk to some more people about this. The one thing I guess that I will start this with is that it disturbs me that there are so many different angles being taken to this when it seems to me like it should be such a simple question. But there's so many emotional appeals, so many political appeals, so much appealing to the wrong side of the brain, if you will.
I just have to say it's not that simple. It seems simple on the surface, but the problems arise when you start looking at the undertext of everything that's being asked and everything that's being refuted. It's not just about one phone, and I think that's been more than well illustrated over the weekend. And they even had San Bernardino victim's mother come out in support of Apple. So it's getting emotional, but I agree that it's cut and dry, but there's a lot of subtext.
It's interesting that you would pick on that particular thing, that emotional part, because I'm looking at the emotional part of one of the senators, I believe, was saying that Apple is choosing to protect the terrorist's privacy as opposed to the public good. And I think I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but so I felt like
that's
that.
a good paraphrase.
Yeah, and I felt like that was kind of a little bit of a cheap shot.
I think I could say the same about a lot of Republicans.
Well,
Sorry.
no, that's okay. That's the thing. I mean, I think there's no way around trying to hit certain political aspects of this particular one, even though we try to keep politics out of this. But this one, it's a little bit tougher. Weldon, where are you coming down on this, and what do you think of all the reactions?
Boy, there's I think the hard part about this issue is there's so many different aspects to it that all get mixed together when people talk about it. So, specifically here, the FBI is not asking for Apple to create a backdoor in their encryption system. What they want to be able to do is get a faster way to test passcodes to unlock the phone. And they want to circumvent, the protections that Apple has in place to slow down the number of attempts you can make to enter or try a passcode and not lock or erase the phone if you fail after too many attempts. And, but the conversation kind of gets clouded with, well, the FBI wants to break encryption and whatnot. And then, you bring in all these other issues too, the way we deal with Muslims in this country and the way we deal with the war on terrorism and, our police state and other kinds of issues all get thrown in there together. It gets confusing. So, I think for me, I kind of want to focus on the particular issue or the specific issue directly in front of us with this case. But as Brett alluded to, I think it's also interesting to talk about the implications for the future. What is this going to lead to? What kind of precedent will it set? What could happen down the road?
Jeff, you've been doing a great job on the Daily Observations podcast of covering this as it's unfolded. And so at this moment, I'll kind of let you roll up what your thinking is, because, again, you've probably really sat down and charted it out better than most of us.
I actually dream about this right now, which is very unhealthy. That's how much time I've been spending just diving into everything I could find about this case. And the main reason I've been diving in so deeply into this is because it was very clear to me very quickly that this is a very profound case. This is a case that's going to be seen as a keystone moment in privacy, in security on a personal level and on a national level, and just overall rights for individuals, not just in this country but around the world, and the rights and responsibilities of major corporations. So, I mean, this is a big, heavy-hitting case, and my feeling is, well, I'll just come right out and say it. This is a horrible, horrible move on the FBI's part. This is a bad, bad thing. And this should not, and please do not let this happen, because this is going to be bad for all of us. Okay, now that I've got my personal stance out of the way, it looks to me like what's happened here is that the FBI really bungled their investigation in the first 24 hours. And so what I'm referring to is after the San Bernardino shooters were tracked down and killed in a firefight with law enforcement officers, the cell phone of the husband suspect, because it was a husband and wife team, his cell phone was recovered. And that cell phone happened to be a work-related phone. And so that phone belonged to San Bernardino County Department of Public Health. And so it was not his personal phone for personal use. And so then the FBI decided they wanted to access the contents of the phone to see if there might be evidence that they could use to pin down who they may or may not have been involved with leading up to this attack, and to find out if maybe there were other attacks planned. And what they did in that first 24 hours was they had San Bernardino County reset the iCloud password associated with that specific phone. When they did that, they blocked the possibility of Apple being able to work with law enforcement agencies through the iCloud account to obtain potential additional backups from the device, which could then be used to potentially find additional evidence in this case. All right, so once the FBI bungled this and everything moved forward, by the time Apple got involved, so this all started in the beginning of December. December 2nd was the date that they committed their terrorist act. Then it's beginning of January. The FBI involves Apple in the case, and Apple is helping in every way they reasonably can. And then it comes down to, hey, we'd like to look at the contents of this phone. And Apple says, okay, we can do these certain things to help you. All we need to do is get the iPhone on a trusted network, and then we can force a backup to happen. And then the FBI is like, funny story. And so at that point, Apple was like, we did what we could. And I'm sorry, but you are now locked out of this phone. And so then the FBI goes ahead with their plan to get a court order forcing Apple to create this version of iOS that Weldon mentioned that strips out the brute force attack protections that the FBI wants to use to get the passcode. And while the FBI says that this is a one-off thing, and it's very clear in the court order that Apple can retain control of the software that they would have to create to make this happen, and then Apple could destroy the software after the fact, that's not what's going to happen. If Apple has to create this software, then what Apple has done is created what's called a forensic instrument. And a forensic instrument, it's we all know what they are. We just don't know that's the term. So like a polygraph test or a breathalyzer if someone is being charged with DUI. These are devices that extract evidence that can then be used in criminal proceedings. And instruments are subject to all kinds of scrutiny, and rightly so, because if you are, being charged with some sort of crime where a polygraph is going to be critical to the investigation, you want to know that whatever evidence is pulled from you through that polygraph test is legit and has not been tampered with and is being interpreted correctly. The way you do that is through peer review and through industry review, which means that in this case, let's say there is evidence on the iPhone the FBI uses as part of a criminal case, then the defense team that would be brought in would be horribly negligent in their duties if they did not subpoena the tools that Apple created to extract this contents from the phone, which means that everything that Apple has done as far as software for this device has to be maintained so that it can be handed over to all the other people that need to scrutinize this and review it, which means it's going to get reverse engineered, which means it's going to get out into the wild. And Apple can't do the one thing that the FBI says, look, it makes it perfect, where they bind this version of iOS to the one single iPhone in question. If you're going to conduct analysis on this forensic tool that Apple must create, you must be able to test it on multiple devices, which means Apple cannot bind it to one phone. It has to be available to all phones, which then means that it's just an open forensic tool that the FBI and law enforcement agencies are going to line up to use all the time.
Jeff, there's one thing in there I want you to clarify, and thank you for that summarization. But there is a big difference, and I want to be real clear on this. There's a big difference between Apple helping the FBI through the iCloud stored data versus the phone data.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very big difference because the iCloud data is not encrypted.
That is correct. And with appropriate court orders, Apple will and has helped law enforcement agencies in the past to obtain contents from iCloud backups. And and this is totally different. What they're asking Apple to do is strip out security measures in iOS so that they can then, they being the FBI, can then just sit there and do brute force attack on the passcodes to unlock this device. They're not asking Apple to unlock the device, that, just to be clear. They just want Apple to create the tools so that they can hack the passcode.
And folks, this is important for you to understand because you back up your data to iCloud. If you don't encrypt your backups, for example, your health data does not get backed up. If you do encrypt it, then that confidential health data does get backed up. So it's easy to understand if you think about exactly what level of security you want for what kind of data. And I think that's a point that's been missed by a lot of folks because there's all this clickbait out there saying, Apple has helped the FBI. Well, yes, they have, as Jeff said, under the right circumstances with the appropriate court orders and not for encrypted data.
And certainly not to unlock a device.
Yes.
Right, and I think what's important there is that they have clearly defined parameters of what they will and won't do, and those are available both to the FBI and to customers. I mean, terms of service, basically. The question, though, if you ignore the idea that the tool itself could ever be reused again, say that the FBI was right, this is a one-time thing, you're helping us do the dirty work. It's still a court order, and there are still hundreds of phones that the FBI wants unlocked. And a court precedent is as good as putting a cracked iOS out there, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Once you set precedent, which is exactly what this case is going to do, then you have laid a groundwork that law enforcement agencies around the country and in other countries are going to jump on. The Manhattan District Attorney, and I just forgot his name. He has come out and very clearly stated, unequivocally stated, that if the court upholds this order and Apple is forced to create this tool, that he plans on using it in all kinds of investigations. That's just Manhattan. Think about the rest of the country.
One of the things I think to think about with, this idea that they might create a version that's tied to the single phone, that technically, I suppose that's possible. They could do it, but like we're saying here with the setting this precedent, they'll just keep coming back and asking for, them to create a new.
Do it again, but for this other phone.
Yeah, now tie it to the second phone, and that the thing I'm concerned about there is it tempts Apple then to take some shortcuts to make it easier for them to respond to these government requests that then leads to vulnerabilities in the software because they know they're going to have to respond to all these requests that come up. They know they're going to have to make changes to their software, so they start making it easier for themselves to do it. And that's no longer serving the customer. I think Apple has the right priority that, their number one goal is to make the system as secure as possible. And all their efforts should be devoted to that. If they get distracted or pulled away into creating some, I'll just call it shortcuts for law enforcement, that I think might lead us to a place where the overall system is less secure for everyone else.
Tim Cook published something to Apple employees this afternoon, and of course that meant it got out immediately. And there was one sentence in there that I thought was really key, and he said that things like keys or things in the physical world are much different than in the digital world. In the physical world, this would seem to be kind of a simple thing, but as I think all three of you have pointed out, in the digital world, you do it once and it's out there, it's gone. In the same way that a video goes viral or a photo goes viral or even just a quote goes viral, that it's all around the planet, everywhere, all of a sudden. Now, this might not be quite the case with this, right up to the point that the wrong person gets their hands on it. And then they're going to push it out to places where maybe nobody intended it for it to go, and now you have a problem.
Sure. And don't discount the power of greed. If you are a forensics company that wants to just lock in control of this and be able to charge people gobs of money to say, I'll unlock an iPhone for you anytime you want. Or maybe you're another country. China, of course, is the one that leaps to mind first. Anyone could show up and have a suitcase loaded with $100 bills and say, if I set this down here and you set a USB stick right over here and we don't look what the other one's doing, you know what I mean? Wink, wink. and the next thing you know, China or North Korea or Joe's Forensic Service, whoever, they've got this. And as you have said, once it's out there, it's out there.
Yeah.
You hear enough stories about people coming back from visits to China with screws missing on the bottom lid of their MacBook Pro and things like that, right? Where, clearly someone's taken it apart to look at it. And if there's a tool like this out there to get past the passcode restrictions, then, why wouldn't they use it anytime somebody goes through customs that they're interested in?
And that's kind of the point here. I don't think there's anyone that would disagree that if we can aid law enforcement in finding and punishing anyone who assisted the San Bernardino shooters, we should do it. And that's the problem, that people are seeing it just as that question, and they're not understanding what Tim Cook said about this being a digital issue as opposed to a physical issue, that you can't do that without really destroying the privacy and the possibility of privacy for all the law-abiding citizens.
Yeah. That's a really tough place for a lot of people. I mean, we're talking about two people that committed a domestic terrorist act. And they killed 14 people. They seriously injured 22 other people. And then the circle that goes around that, of the lives that are permanently altered or destroyed in some way. I mean, that's a lot of people. But we're also talking about one phone. And this one phone that may or may not have anything of value on it. And it's based on what we know today. It's likely there's not much of value on that phone. Is that worth destroying the privacy and security of millions and millions of people? Because once we go down this path, then we are essentially giving up encryption, even though they're not going to hack the encryption. We're giving up encryption in a fundamental way, because if someone can break through our encryption, it doesn't matter how well we encrypt something, it's already been broken through. So what does that do to commercial transactions? Like, let's say you want to buy something from Amazon. What happens to your encryption then? Is your credit card still safe? What about if you're using Apple Pay to pay for something at Walgreens? Is your encrypted transaction actually safe?
And it's not just Apple Pay; it's Google Pay and Android Pay, and every other pay is out there now or going to be out there. I mean, this is not an Apple issue. That's the thing. It's an encryption issue. It's a digital issue, and that's the thing that I keep pushing.
Well, what about an Amazon Echo? What if the FBI went to Amazon and said, whatever encryption you've put in here, so that people can't just listen in on whatever Chuck is saying in his home, we want you to pull that part out, but don't worry, it's just for this one Echo.
Well, and that's where it gets like credit cards. I mean, banks have always had certain measures in place that you can, retract or detect that kind of thing. But exactly like Amazon Echo, Siri, general information, things that can be stolen, resold, or used against you in any way. That's the stuff. That's why I use encryption. It's not just my SSL certificate and my bank account. It's everything in my life. Not that it's all private stuff. It's just not stuff I would hand to anybody and would prefer to know that it is absolutely secure. And I think that offering the backdoor it's not tantamount to disabling encryption in the way that you're talking right now, but it is the first crack in that wall to make that happen for our government, any government, hackers, etc. Can I make this political again?
Oh, sure.
This sentiment that you guys are describing was what led to the Patriot Act. And we all supported, we need to take these measures to stay safe. And then in the decade that followed, we saw exactly how far that removal of our liberty and privacy, that stuff we were willing to give up in that moment, we've seen exactly what kind of damage that can do in the long term. We've seen what the NSA has done since then. We've seen what government from top level down to city level can get away with in the name of the Patriot Act now. So I think it's a much smaller instance, and sure, we can say it's about one phone, but I think people who have watched this their whole lives should know the ramifications of a case like this.
Brett, you said three of my favorite letters, NSA. This, I don't know if it was today or over the weekend. I think it was over the weekend that a former director of the NSA and CIA came out and said that while he was sympathetic to the FBI's position, he really supported Apple in the encryption.
There's the specific issue in front of us with the iPhone is not to remove the encryption, right? That's not what they're asking to do. It's not what's going to happen. And certainly any effort to try to weaken the encryption, I think, is terrible. We ought to avoid it at any cost. What they're trying to do here is actually go kind of through the front door by brute forcing the passcode. And there's a real simple answer to that. If you're concerned about somebody brute forcing your passcode, just make it longer.
Or use alphanumeric.
Yeah, you just enable the alphanumeric and make it, 12, 16 characters. And it will never be broke. Well, statistically will not be broken through brute force attack in your lifetime. So you don't have to worry about it anymore.
To say that's the easy answer, on one hand, you are absolutely right, because all we have to do is switch from a 4-digit passcode to a 6-digit passcode, and we've made the ability to hack into our iPhones or Android phones or whatever astronomically more difficult. But on the other hand, that's kind of like saying, oh, well, the government's going to do what it's going to do. If we do this, we'll be fine. What happens when the governments are like, yeah, we're just going to keep doing this, and they find more ways to encroach on that digital privacy, and then at some point a 6-digit passcode, an 8-digit passcode, an alphanumeric passcode becomes irrelevant because governments have taken so many steps to erode into privacy, digital privacy, and into encryption that our passcodes just simply don't matter anymore.
Well, I believe in strong encryption, and sorry to cut you off, Chuck, but absolutely. And I think the answer here for Apple is to continue to work on making the iPhone more and more secure. We're talking about an iPhone here in this specific case that doesn't have the secure enclave chip on it, so it's a little easier to get around. The iPhones that came after do have the secure enclave chip. They're harder to get into. I think Apple should continue to make it harder and harder for I'll say it differently. I'll rephrase. Apple should make it more and more secure. Right? They should continue to push the envelope and make all their devices as secure as possible.
Jeff, one thing, I don't know that I completely agree with you. I don't think this is an intentional effort by the government to erode privacy, but I think that that's the end result, because maybe
I was a wee bit hyperbolic when I said that. However, it does feel to me like one of many baby steps down a path.
Very intentional. You don't take something like this on a path that will eventually lead to a Supreme Court decision over one phone unless there is a bigger play. I mean, what they're asking for is the ability. They're asking for the precedent, which is absolutely the first baby step and a lot of other steps.
Okay, that's fair.
I'm not saying that their motives are necessarily evil. I'm not sounding that alarm. Yeah. I'm just saying that in a black and white world where you're private or you're not, this goes over that line.
Well, here's where I think, just a slightly different perspective on it, I could offer up. The law enforcement has long had the ability to, get a search warrant and go through all your stuff and rifle through all your papers. And we've had pen registers on the telephone side for forever to keep track of your calls. And they've had all these tools, and they've had the ability, it's kind of long established, that law enforcement can go get evidence that they want.
We've hit a point where we've gone from the government and law enforcement agencies having all of these tools that do allow them to access our information in reasonable ways. What I think is different now, if we take the analogy of your local police department gets a warrant, they come into your house and they go through your papers looking for documents that prove whatever case they have against you. What if I decide that I'm going to create my own personal code so that I can handwrite or type out all of my documents so that they're in a code that no one can read? The FBI breaks into my house, they get those documents, and now they have all these papers they can't read. And to me, that's kind of the analogy for if I take Weldon's comments a little farther. We have the same sort of thing. It's just that instead of it being on paper, we've put it into our iPhones.
Jeff, bring me back to that because I want to touch on that. Weldon, you had a little hiccup, so can you finish your thoughts? Sorry about that.
Well, I finished my sentence before I got cut up in it. So I hopefully it came across as a complete thought. But really just the idea that we've had the ability for law enforcement to go and seize evidence and look through it and kind of use it to build a case against someone else. But we have to figure out how that's going to work in our new digital world. And we don't have enough law that is clear on the subject. We don't have enough experience with it, I think, both from the law enforcement side and from the personal side. And so these kinds of cases are important, I think, for us to figure it out and decide where we want to go. To come back to what Jeff was saying, if we had incriminating evidence on analog materials, pen and paper, if you will, that's written in code, part of our current laws, you can't incriminate yourself. You don't have to testify against yourself. You can plead the fifth, right? And so the same thing applies here. If you have encrypted material digitally, you can't be forced to divulge. Well, this is my understanding. I'm no lawyer, but my understanding, you can't be forced to divulge the password or passcode that locks that.
But you can be required to give them your fingerprint.
Well, there you go. So we have to work this stuff out.
Search and seizure requires a warrant. And like I was saying, the Patriot Act circumvents a lot of the government's need for that kind of due process. And combine that with the tools to get into our most encrypted tools, our phones, our computers, etc. It's a scary prospect. I mean, I'm not a big fan of having my house searched by the FBI either. Not that I think there would be cause. But and I can't your point is really good. I can't exactly in this moment articulate why I think my phone and my online accounts are more critical to me than what's on my desk right now, like the physical objects.
For me, if I had something, documents that I felt were completely inappropriate for the government to have access to, then I would find some secure place to put them in some secure form so that it would greatly reduce the likelihood the government would get at those things. To me, that's how my iPhone is. And so I have found a way to have those documents and other pieces of information that I don't think the government has any business seeing stored away in a fashion where it's extremely difficult for them to get at.
But if you were a terrorist and I really wanted you to get busted, that would upset me that you had those hiding places. Playing devil's advocate.
Oh, absolutely. And you being upset would be totally justified.
But don't the terrorists and a minute ago we were all sounding like a bunch of subversives,
Yeah.
And that's not the case here. This is all a lot of what ifs. But if you were a terrorist, unfortunately, there are plenty of other encryption schemes out there that are equally strong that right now are available to anyone who wants to put a front end on them and use them. So it's, to be fair about it, it's not like this is the first and last place, but this is the encryption that most people are going to have access to. And to go back, I think Brett was the one that set precedent. Okay, so let's say that Apple agrees to do this now, and then in the next version of iOS, they develop a whole new encryption scheme, an unbreakable encryption scheme. We're stuck with the precedent that Apple broke the last one. They can break this one, so the next court order says you have to break this one, Apple, and we're right back to where we are now.
Well, what if Apple creates an encryption system that they cannot break through?
Well, the phone is what they're talking about, basically disabling hardware features, like hardware integration features. They can't decrypt your encrypted phone.
That's true. But right now, because of the way iOS is written, the brute force hacking elements, that's in the operating system. So
Right,
Apple can change the software. If they change that to a hardware thing, then Apple can no longer brute force, or Apple can no longer change the operating system to allow for a brute force password attack.
So like a
that's an
pure
area
biometric login, or
That's an area for speculation right now. Currently, the secure enclave, all the passcode attempts go through that secure enclave, and there's an 80 millisecond delay on each passcode attempt. And so that slows down an automated system enough that it's impossible to, do so many tries. Like, one of the details we got out of the Snowden revelations was that, he made an offhand comment about something like, you should assume that your adversary has the ability to perform 1 trillion tries per second, right? So, that's a lot of computing power applied to brute force attacking a password or a passcode. So an 80 millisecond delay, right, would reduce that number substantially. You would not be able to make 1 trillion tries in a second. And so it makes it almost impossible to go through the front by guessing the key that way. There's some speculation now that 80 millisecond delay might be coded into the secure enclave through firmware, and it could be changed. No one really knows. I don't think Apple will tell us.
Actually, Apple has said they can modify the security controls for the secure enclave through software.
Yes. I think we'll be hard pressed to get all the details on it. But
Apple has said that, and others said that they didn't.
A future version could definitely have that baked directly into the hardware, so it's not changeable. There's no possible way to get past that delay, and that would make the system more secure.
There's so many things here that I want to touch on, but I guess at the end of the day, I want to make sure that people are educated about this, and hopefully they're getting educated here, along with plenty of other places that have been talking about it. But intelligently. We're stuck right now. You got to understand that we're making decisions right now for things that are going to change in the future. We're stuck with the RIT Act that is kind of driving this right now because it was created in a non-digital world. Jeff, what you were saying earlier about we'll just extend the length of our passcodes and make them alphanumeric and we'll be fine. Well, that's based on today's technology. 5 years from now, we may have better algorithms to crack these things. We're probably almost certainly going to have faster computers. We're going to have more computers. So, what's going to happen in 10, 15, 20 years? And you think about the Constitution trying to hold up for over 200 years. Some of this stuff, it does get scary when you start setting these precedents and start letting the digital horse out of the barn.
You can make the security as intense as you want, and you can make it so the user can't even get in. But the fact is, if you give the government permission via court order to make the company that made it find a way in, there's really nothing that a company could do to stop at least being asked to make the attempt all the time. Once you've said, just do it.
I think there's a couple of big principles at play. One is, what sort of personal privacy are we allowed? What can our government ask for and receive? The other is, what power does the government have to direct a private company to make changes to their products to give them access to it? Can the government tell Apple, you need to redo this code, the security code for iOS, to make it easier for us? Do they have that right, if you will? And those issues are important. Personally, I'm more of a fan of private and personal and civil liberty. And so, I would rather see a direction where we say, people are allowed to keep things private. The government cannot compel you to reveal things that you don't want to reveal, and through direct evidence, whatever. But at the same time, I'm not really comfortable with this other aspect of it, where I don't want the government to go tell Apple, hey, here's how you need to make your product. I'd much rather we continue the current course where, Apple is going to the consumer and saying, we want to sell you this product because it's secure. The promise that we're making to you is we're going to make the most secure product that we can, and in exchange for your money, right, we're going to give you something that will help you keep your own personal privacy. That's what I want.
Can you imagine the keynote for the release of the U.S. government iPhone?
Oh.
Who would they invite on stage? It'd be worse than what's his name from AT&T?
Mr. Cheney, could you come up here for the presentation?
I laugh only because I'm afraid.
Well, Jeff, I think there's a reason we should be afraid. And am I the only one that felt like the FBI was manipulating socially some of the opinions with some of the stuff that came out over the last Friday or over the weekend? For example, they were saying that this was an Apple marketing ploy, and it's like that just, I mean, that seemed to play to a certain percentage of the population who are either Apple haters or just have a big distrust of big companies or tech companies. That bothered me a lot.
Okay, well, you want to talk about unprecedented? That felt unprecedented to me. The way I see it, the FBI's case should be able to stand on its own merits, and the agency, and certainly not the director, should feel compelled to be making public statements about the case. And actually, it's not even about the case; it's about Apple. I mean, this is not something I've seen out of law enforcement in the past, at least not on this scale.
Well, it seems like name calling.
Yeah, I mean, the FBI has, from the beginning, has made this very public and very emotional, and especially after this last weekend with Director Comey doing his, I'll call it his op-ed, that in my slanted nutshell equates to, don't you worry your little head about this. This is all fine. There's nothing bad here. I mean, seeing that, I'm glad I was sitting down when I read it, because I was really shocked to see something like that. So yeah, this is a very personal, very public, very emotional event, and I think the FBI has done everything they can to make sure it's exactly that.
I think that it was very calculated from the start to pick this case to test the waters. They knew they were going to get more sympathy from the public because of the nature of the specific crime in San Bernardino.
Well, and you can also say it's just about one phone. It was something that seemed very small and minute. But that's what I was saying is this is definitely the first step, and it's a calculated step as well.
Weldon, that point has disturbed me a lot, because at first I thought, okay, that sounds like we're all just a little paranoid. But then when you read the number of subpoenas are out there, the number of times that the FBI has asked Apple to do this in other cases and wants them to do it in other cases, and yet this is the one they stand on, that just really, that feeds right into it.
Yeah, I'm a cynic on this aspect of it. And I think law enforcement, is particularly at the federal level, is very aware of how politicized it's become since 9/11 and all the subsequent actions. And they understand the political environment, and they're sensitive to it. And so they're picking their, what hill they want to stand on, if you will.
So I'll throw one more little tinfoil hat thing in the ring. That I talked to someone this weekend who is a government contractor, and he pointed out the fact that maybe that the reason that the NSA, CIA, former NSA, CIA director came out in support of Apple is that they already have the tool to crack it. They just don't want the FBI to have it. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we know that there is some interagency rivalry. We saw some of that in 9/11. So
but keep in mind, he's working in the private sector now. So,
absolutely.
I wouldn't think it's interagency rivalry that would drive that. I think it's more about revealing their capabilities to their enemies, right? If the NSA does have that ability, they wouldn't want to make a statement that says, "Well, we could do that, but we just don't want to," right? They would say, "Oh, well, we don't know anything about that."
Well, I would find it unfathomable that there isn't a way to do this without Apple. There absolutely has to be. In my mind, there are too many infinite possibilities in our technical world that this couldn't possibly be done without Apple. But I think they very much don't want to, hire some cracker off of Google, and not from Google, but on the internet, to do this. I think they want to make this a legal case.
Oh yeah, it goes back to what we've been saying from the beginning. This is about precedent.
Yeah, and that may be the scariest aspect of all.
Now, to go completely left field here, can you imagine the horrible position that James Comey, as the director of the FBI, is in? I mean, he's tasked with protecting the United States on some level. And he's in a position where technology has advanced so quickly that law enforcement hasn't been able to keep up in a reasonable way. And what's this guy supposed to do? I mean, he's got to figure out ways to effectively conduct investigations and conclude those investigations with arrests when are appropriate. But if you can't even get at the data that becomes the evidence that you need to prosecute a case, what are you going to do? That said, I think he's way off base here.
Well, the irony here is there's no case to prosecute, right? The criminals, terrorists in question, they're dead, right? So, it's about there's other important issues at stake, right? In terms of finding out if they're coordinating with anybody else, if there's other people that are involved, or there's possible future attacks. They're important things, but there's no specific case here.
Well, and I would argue that what you're saying is true in the case of the FBI, but we're quite aware that the NSA's technical capabilities have exceeded most of what we believed possible. So I don't think there's a deficit of high tech.
Yeah.
In doing this show, I'm usually the guy that plays devil's advocate for the positions, but you guys kind of pile on. This time, though, I'm finding it increasingly difficult. Jeff, I think your point was very well taken about the FBI director and his charge, and that he would love to have these tools. And I think that what you got to say to him is, look, okay, so your job has gotten tougher. No matter what your industry, we all have had things get tougher in our jobs. But it's not like the phone is the absolute end-all be-all. There's still a lot of police work. There's still a lot of other avenues that you can use. They are making it, unfortunately, come across as this is the one key. Sorry for the the play on words here, but this is the one key that unlocks all the problems, that we can solve everything. That's at times what I hear people believing, that, well, if we can just get access to this stuff, then we won't have any more problems, that the FBI can protect us. And that lack of understanding of the technology here, it really worries me.
Yeah, well, and I sympathize with the director and with the aforementioned tech deficit, but we need to put our foot down and say, you can't change our laws to your convenience. Our laws are there to protect us as citizens. Our Constitution is there to protect us as Americans. It's not up for grabs. I mean, Apple and all the rest of us will do whatever we can to help with investigations like this, but not when you're asking to change a fundamental rule about our lives, not just theirs.
Well said. Well said. Before we wrap up, I want to do one thing, and it's a plug for something I wrote. And I actually wrote this on the MacVoices blog before the Apple versus FBI thing came out, and that was my a practical approach to backdoor encryption issues. Because we had a great discussion about this at our last user group when it was still a little bit more objective and it wasn't so personal. And I guess, folks, I can give you the gist of the article. You're welcome to read it and just go to the MacVoices blog, and I'll have a link in the show notes. But at the end of the day, do you want a Barack Obama-led administration to have access to your information? Do you want a Donald Trump-led administration to have access? Do you want North Korea? Do you want China? Do you want a Vladimir Putin-led country having access? I go through a whole bunch of examples. One individual said it was a great nonpartisan look at this, and it's like, well, this was never intended to be a partisan issue. It's a tech issue. It's an encryption issue. So please go check that out.
It's a great piece.
Thank
I
you.
loved it, Chuck.
Thank you. It just, it bothers me that it gets into so many emotional. This whole discussion gets so emotional when you really have to look at it and say, okay, at the end of the day, this is about a bigger picture. And you got to look at that bigger picture, because once it's out, and you can't stop it. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. This has been fascinating. Hopefully, we've encouraged people to get educated on this. Folks, do that. Don't just listen to us, even though we think we're right. Go out. Don't listen to all the fluff, but take a critical look at it. And if you feel strongly enough, which we think you should, contact your legislators and let them know what you're thinking and your position on it. Brett, where can folks get in touch with you? Because I have an idea there may be some people who want to express opinions to any or all of us.
You can send your letters to Chuck Joyner.
Yes.
You can find me at brettterpstra.com. There's a contact form there. You can yell at me if you like. And then I'm TT Scuff everywhere. I don't argue on Twitter, so don't bother trying. But yeah, and then you can hear more of my rantings at esn.fm/systematic and overtired.
Great. It's good to have you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Mr. Gamet, always a pleasure. Where can folks get in touch with you so they can yell at you?
It's always great to get to be on a show with you, Chuck. And this one was especially fun. You can find me over at MacObserver.com. It's really easy to find links to my email and to Twitter. Twitter is at jgamet. And if you want to offer up your opinion, another easy way to do that, go look at the show notes for Mac Observer's Daily Observations podcast over the past week, because pretty much every episode has been about this specific case.
Great. Yes, and I would encourage that as well, because Jeff and his team have done a really great job of covering a lot of these specific issues in a bit more depth.
Thank you.
Weldon, I'm sure people are going to want to yell at you.
Everyone does, yeah.
Yeah. How do they do it?
They can find me on Twitter at Weldon, Weldon. Can I add one? I've got to say one thing.
Sure.
I've got to say one thing, because because just for my professional integrity here, right? Because this is a work-owned phone, right? The San Bernardino County owns the phone. Why is this not enrolled in a mobile device management
Exactly.
solution?
I know. What's up with that?
Right? This is what I do for a living, so I could not end the podcast without saying this, that the device should have been enrolled in MDM. The employer, if the employer wants to unlock it, they should be able to through MDM.
They just click a button, unlock.
Okay.
Right.
Weldon, thank you.
Sorry.
Give us 30 seconds on what an MDM or mobile device management system is, so folks understand.
Yeah, so mobile device management, or MDM, is a blanket term that Apple uses to describe management technology that they have built into iOS. And in order for this to be active, the device has to enroll in the MDM solution. So you have to agree for it to be managed. Or if the organization buys it directly from Apple, it can be forced to be enrolled in the MDM. And one of the capabilities of an MDM is that it can reset the passcode on an enrolled device. So a government entity, it's a municipality, it doesn't matter. Their devices should be enrolled in an MDM. They ought to be able to manage them. If they want to unlock them as the owner of the iPhone, they should be able to. And they not at the whims of their employees that happen to have the device in their possession. So, that's kind of a failure on that side. And it would make this whole argument moot, but as we've discussed for the last hour, I don't think the argument is really about this one specific phone, but I couldn't let that go. Sorry.
No,
I'm glad you brought that up.
Totally agree.
Because it's been bugging me from the very beginning.
Yep, absolutely. Folks, you can find me at Chuck Joyner on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, obviously on the MacVoices.com and MacVoicesblog.com websites. There are contact forms there as well. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this. At the end of the day, I guess, again, just go get educated. Our thoughts certainly go out to everyone, all the victims of the San Bernardino shooting. We do not mean to treat this lightly. Sometimes you got to just laugh at the absurdity of some of it. But at the end of the day, this is important. Please, please go out and educate yourself. Until the next time, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is the Mac Jury on Mac Voices. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the Mac Voices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the Mac Voices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest Mac Voices news from our front page or at macvoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free MacVoices Magazine on Flipboard by visiting macvoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.